Hi guys, have you ever wanted to shatter any widget into a million pieces? Or even shatter your whole app into a million pieces? I know I have. Anyway, this is John from THKP, and today I'm going to show you how to do this effect. And even if you don't want to do this exact effect, there's some super interesting techniques in here, so stick around and check it out. Okay, this time around we're just going to start with a very simple app. These things can be destroyed, but they don't do the shattering effect. So let's see what all of this looks like. First thing, we have our main.dart file. This just has the app itself. We have our shattering home. Home has a list of destinations and a list of stack stuff. And I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but basically home is a list where if the stack stuff has stuff in it, it will render a stack. I created this stack thing widget, which is basically just a positioned, rotated, clickable widget. And then I also created this destination card, which is just this, simple card with an image in the background, some text in the foreground, and a trash button. You can see that when the trash button is clicked, all I do is remove the destination. And when a stack item is clicked, I just remove the stack item. So let's start working on our shattering widget. This will be a stateful widget. Now what I want to do here is firstly provide the child. This is just the widget that will actually explode, and instead of just directly providing a child, what I'm going to do is provide a function that builds the child, and as an argument to this function there will be an explode function, or I guess I'll call it shatter because we've been saying shatter over and over. So this is something similar to an animated builder where instead of just directly rendering its child, it will build its child based on the result of this function. So down here, instead of saying widget child, I can say widget builder, and I need to pass in a shatter function. So let's define a function here called shatter. Let's start working on our shatter function. And the basic idea behind this is when we request a widget to be shattered, we want to first paint that widget onto an image, and then we can use a custom painter to draw a bunch of shards of that image. So let's start adding a couple aspects that we will need here. For one, we're going to need a UI image here. This will essentially be the rendered version of our child widget. I need to import Dart UI. We will also need an animation controller. And what I also want to do with this controller is say when the animation is finished, I want to call another method that can be passed in that will tell the outer widget that we're done, so we can finish whatever operation we were going to do. So if status is equal to animation status completed, then I'll throw a set state in here. I'll reset our controller, and I will call widget.onShatterCompleted, which we have not actually created yet. So let's create this guy. Now, when we request for our widget to be shattered, we can do a couple things here. So first things first, we want to get our widget as an image. And in order to accomplish that, we need to use a special widget called a Repaint Boundary. And this just says whatever is inside my bounds, I can ask it to repaint to an image anytime. So this is exactly what we want here. In order for this to work, we need to provide a key, So I will just create a global key here. So now that this is inside of our repaint boundary, inside of our shatter method, we can get the render repaint boundary. And we can render that boundary to an image, which will basically create an image out of our current widget. Now inside here, we can, firstly, we'll set our image parameter. We can also do this inside of a set state just to tell our widget to redraw itself. And we can start our controller animating. Now, one other thing I do want to do is break our image into shards, but I'll wait a minute in order to do that. So now what we can do is when our controller is animating, we want to render a completely different image. So we can do that pretty easily by just saying when the controller is animating, let's show a custom paint. We can set a size here because we have our image now. We know the exact size of our widget. And for our painter, we'll define a new painter. We'll call it a shattering widget painter. We'll pass in our image, and eventually we will pass in our shards, and we'll also pass in the controller's value. So let's create a shards here. I need to create a shard class. We will define this in a minute. Let's define this shattering widget painter. Inside this should repaint, I'm just going to return true. This will effectively make it repaint as often as possible. And inside here, for now, I'm just going to define a rect. And I'm also going to define a paint. Now for this paint, we can use an image shader. This will allow us to paint an image onto shapes. Doesn't really matter what the tile mode is because we're not going to tile. And for the matrix, I will just pass in an identity matrix, which means there will be no transformation. So we need to add our image here. Okay, so for now, what I will do is I'll just draw a rect. Use this rect, and then we'll just use our image painter. And this will just draw the image itself. In order to see if this is working, why don't we just say 50 times shatter progress. And in our top, we'll say 50 times shatter progress. So what this will do is just basically move the widget diagonally down and to the right. Okay, so I think we have all of our pieces in place. We can start trying this out. Let's add our shattering widget to our stack thing. So here's our stack thing. As I mentioned before, it's just a click listener. We got a transform, that's what does this rotation. And then we have an image. We also have this on tap function. So what I want to do is wrap the gesture detector in a shattering widget. The builder takes a shatter function. So when you click this gesture detector, I will cause it to shatter. So instead of just passing on tap here, I'll call the shatter function. And then when the shatter is completed, then I'll call the on tap function. So let's refresh this and see what happens. Okay, so it didn't really do what we expected. I think it's because I didn't wrap this in an animated widget. Okay, so now let's see what happens. All right, so you can see that kind of did a weird animation. That's obviously not what we want it to do, but it's just for testing purposes. All right, now let's wrap these destination cards in our shattering widget. And this will just kind of show that any widget, you can wrap any widget and it will just work. So shattering widget. So when you tap the trash can, that's when we want to call our shatter function. And then for the onShatterCompleted, that's when we want to actually remove the destination from the list. So let's see what that does. So we can see that weird animation is playing. So now let's do the real thing. Let's break our image into shards and then animate these shards exploding outward. So in order to keep things simple, I'm going to have all of my shards be a triangle. I'm just going to define my own triangle class. And we will just have triangles be 3 offsets. We'll create a constructor for this. And I just want to provide one method here called split. Now what split will do is it will take a triangle and just chop it in half, and it will use the longest edge as the point where it chops it in half. So what we need to do is just figure out what the longest edge is. So we'll do side 1, p2 minus p1, distance squared. And here's where we do our actual splitting. So if side 1 is less than side 2 and side 1 is less than side 3, we can get a vector representing the difference between side 1 and side 2, or rather p2 and p1. We can find the midpoint. And then we can return our 2 triangles. Oh, we actually want side 1 to be the largest side. I flipped these. So if side 1 is the largest side, then we'll split on side 1. Let's do the other sides. So if side 2 is the largest side, we'll use a similar technique to split on side 2. And then if side 3 is the largest side, we'll just use the exact same technique here. Now one more thing I'm going to provide in my triangle is just a getter for the center of the triangle. So this will get us, maybe it's called the geometric center, but it's basically just all the vertices divided by the number of vertices. All right, so now our shard will consist of a triangle. I also want each shard to have a rotation, and I want each shard to have an offset, which will define its velocity. So what we need to do is just create a bunch of triangles, and then we can create a bunch of shards out of them. So as I mentioned, here is where I want to break my image into shards. So we can start with a list of triangles. And what we can do is if the image is wider than it is tall, then we'll start with the width sort of broken into 3 triangles. Otherwise, we'll break the height into 3 triangles. So I will just break it into 0, 0, 0.30, 0, 1. So that's our first triangle. And here is our other triangles. And if the image is taller than it is wide, then I will use these 3 triangles. Then, in order to kind of create a random assortment of triangles from large to small, I can just map this list a couple times. I can use some random number generator. And if it's true, I can split the 2 triangles. Otherwise, I'll just do nothing. and then I can expand that. So I need a random number generator. Okay, so what these two lines will do is they'll iterate over the three triangles, and if this random number generator, this is basically a coin toss, if it's true, it will split the triangles into two, and if it's false, it'll just return the same triangle, and then it just expands it into a flat list. So we'll start with a list of triangles and we'll end with a list of triangles. What we can do is just take these two lines and do it over and over. So this will kind of randomly split the triangle into a bunch of sub-triangles. Then, in order to get our shards, we can take this huge list of triangles and we can map them into shards. So shard is just the triangle. It's some rotation, which I'll just randomly generate. Okay, so what this is doing is, for the rotation, it's just choosing a random rotational velocity between -0.3 and +0.3. And for the center, it's taking the actual center of the triangle, which is normalized, meaning that x and y values are between 0 and 1. It's subtracting 0.5, which means we'll basically wind up with a value that radiates outward from the center of the widget. And then it just multiplies it by some random number times 600. So this will give us some big velocity so that the shard explodes outward. So now that we have some valid shards, we can implement our rendering. So we'll just iterate over our shards. And we want to get the center of the shard. I haven't written this method yet, so let's do that. So this will be similar to the triangle get center method, except we'll be multiplying all of the values by the width and height. Let's also make another method in this shard class while we're here, called toPath, and we'll pass in a size. So this is, we'll move to triangle P1dx. We're basically just making a path out of our triangle, but we want to multiply in our size. Okay, so this will just create a triangular path, and we can use that to render our image. So let's go back down to our custom drawer. So for every one of our shards, we will get the center of the shard. We will save the current state of the canvas because we want to do some rotations and translations and things. We'll translate our canvas by the center. Then we can rotate our canvas by the shard's rotation. We'll multiply that by the progress of the shatter. Then we can translate our canvas back and then add our shard velocity. And -dy plus the shard's y velocity multiplied by the progress. Then we can actually draw our shard. We can use our image paint. And then what we want to do is just restore our canvas because we're going to do this for every single shard. And we can actually delete some of these other things. Looks pretty good. Let's restart our app and see what happens. Alright, so here we are. We're breaking it into a bunch of different pieces. We haven't actually implemented this button yet, so let's go ahead and do that. In order to do that, we'll just wrap our entire scaffold in a shattering widget. And when the shattering is complete, we'll just set state and we'll set some value to true. We'll introduce that value to our state. And then if that value is true, instead of showing our normal scaffold, we'll just show a scaffold that's completely black. All right, so that's the effect in brief. I really like this technique of using this Repaint Boundary. I'll probably be using this for other things. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And feel free to add a comment about other video topics we should explore. We always really like to hear from you guys. All right, well, have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.